time around, I want to do something a little bit different with the Hulu documentary, The Secrets of Hillsong. Now, we've talked about what went on in front of the camera, and it's not good. Hillsong, as much as anything, is now a cautionary tale to all of us to be vigilant about watching, as the Apostle Paul says, our life and doctrine closely. But when it comes to things like this, we need some lessons in discernment so we don't overreact. We need to talk about those behind the camera, the producers of the series. And I want to do two things. I want to, number one, commend them, and number two, critique them. The producers were Vanity Fair Studios and Scout Productions, and there was a woman named Stacey Lee that was acting as the producer and director who produced a very high quality piece, which is one of the reasons that the whole thing is very damaging to Hillsong. And that's my first commendation. Lee knows how to make a documentary. Visuals are top notch, the pacing, the features, and the interviews were from lots of different angles. They went very in depth. They were very thorough in raking Hillsong over the coals. And theologically, we all need to remember something when it comes to that kind of stuff, that God himself doesn't shy away from allowing people who are presumably outside his kingdom to judge those inside. The whole book of Habakkuk, for instance, is dedicated to this question. The prophet looks at foreign countries who didn't worship God at all being used by God to judge Israel. Listen what Habakkuk says. Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? And in Romans, Paul notes that God says to Israel, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. In other words, the people of God can make God look bad, and that's why he allows those on the outside to judge those inside. Now, that's why Peter says this, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. How we behave can and will be looked at and even judged by those who don't care about God or church or the Bible. And we need to come to grips with this fact that in God's economy, those outside are within their rights to tag believers off base. And in fact, it warrants it. It's a good thing. But the twist is that doesn't mean those outside are right in themselves, as if they are living better lives even. And that's my critique. The producers obviously had an agenda which went beyond the mere facts of the matter with Hillsong and into their own goals and measures they held Hillsong to. They allowed themselves to feel superior by their own standards in certain categories. Now, there's two that were very evident and threaded throughout the entire series. Now, the first was diversity. Now, it was the testimony of people of color who had contact with Hillsong in New York, primarily, that it purported to be diverse. Carl Lentz was outspoken about the 2020 riots in opposition to racism, but the knock against him was few people of color were put in places in leadership. Now, that's fair enough. That's what eyewitnesses had to say. However, at times, it felt like the producers were very choosy about what they featured and what they didn't in order to drive a particular narrative and just blanket the whole operation in racism. And that may not be fair. The reason I say that is Australia, where Hillsong is from, is 85 to 90% white European descent. And the next largest category of diversity that's not European is Chinese. And then next it's those from India, and only a little over 1% are of black African descent. Now, with that said, the sheer population pool they are dealing with would inevitably make them very majority white. But that's not the most important part. See, in spite of that, what the documentary failed to point out was how international Hillsong is. They have churches in city centers in 30 different countries and on 6 different continents. Among those countries are Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, all Latino lead pastors leading the way, by the way. They're in Fiji, Indonesia, Japan, Kenya, the list goes on. And when you look at the leadership in those places, the leaders are indigenous to those places. Why they weren't more diverse in New York, I don't know, but their congregation is wildly international in ways that go above and beyond diversity standards we measure by here in the US, which is related to my second critique. The producers used how Hillsong handled LGBTQ issues as a battle axe against them. Now, granted, there were some weird things, like one young man who had an unwanted molestation when he was growing up was disqualified from serving because of that. I'm not sure how they arrived at that conclusion. But the overall knock was simple. They had conservative views on how to handle the LGBTQ community. Now, this is where the producers are importing their worldview and standards and imposing them on a Christian environment. Now, on that score, Hillsong is no different from scores and scores of churches around the world. So are scores and scores of Muslim mosques around the world, by the way, too. The fact is, most biblically informed and historically orthodox churches hold to a traditional Christian sexual ethic. In 2,000 years, that's not been very popular with people. It won't be now. That's just the nature of the beast. You may not agree with that, but from a Christian perspective, they would not be tagged off base for that. Now, I want to combine both the diversity issue and the LGBTQ issues and leave you with food for thought. Okay, so the worldview of the producers of The Secrets of Hillsong is pretty obviously postmodern with a dose of queer theory, is kind of what I picked up on. Now, this means they're critical theorists when it comes to race. They see white Christian men as the cause of most of the world's evils, and that means they're presumably anti-colonial and would be all for battling heteronormativity, right? But with all of Hillsong's flaws, they illustrate a few important things which fly in the face of some of this philosophy. First, Christianity, especially Pentecostal Christianity, which is what Hillsong is an international phenomenon. Christianity is growing fastest outside of the West. Christianity is an extraordinarily diverse and cross-cultural religion. Now, second, in these places like Asia and Africa and South America, Christian sexual ethics are conservative. There have been schisms inside international denominations where church leadership from the U.S. wanted to introduce LGBTQ freedoms into the church life in those non-Western countries, and they were pushed back on. Now, third, one of the most horrific parts of the entire documentary was the expose on Brian Houston's dad, who was a predator. He was a pedophile. Now, the documentary rightly condemns this as evil. And from a Christ-centered worldview perspective, sexual abuse of children is wickedness of the first order. However, the worldview that's being promoted in postmodernism and queer theory at its root is leading increasingly towards justifying and acceptance of pedophilia, using euphemisms like cross-generational relationships and minor attracted persons. See, the Christ-centered worldview would always and resolutely say pedophilia is a gross evil. Now, the new way of looking at things reflected in the worldview of the producers is to toy with it and to justify it. Now, if you want to delve into that a little bit more, we made this video look at that. I hope all of that helps. See you next time.